Hello everyone, myself Prabhas Singh, Assistant Professor from ABES Engineering College, Ghaziabad. Today in this lecture, we will discuss about the introduction of dynamic programming. Dynamic programming was invented by Richard Bellman in the year 1950 to solve the optimization problems. Dynamic programming is basically an improvement to a recursive approach or the divide and conquer approach. If we talk about the definition of a dynamic programming, it is a method of solving a complex problems by breaking them into a smaller subproblems. That is, it follows a similar approach as the divide and conquer approach. In this, we simply divide a problem into a smaller subproblems and solve each subproblem just once and store their solutions. Now, the basic difference between a divide and conquer and dynamic programming is that in divide and conquer, we solve the same subproblem by dividing them into the subproblems, and these subproblems solutions will be obtained and solved again and again in order to increase the complexity. But what dynamic programming has done, it divide a given problem into the subproblem and obtain the sub-solutions of these problems, and it ensured that each subproblem must be solved once rather than solving it again and again. Solving this subproblem once, that data was stored in a table, and whenever it is required, it can be retrieved from there. Now, if we take a outcome of this discussion, the basic difference between divide and conquer and dynamic programming is that in divide and conquer, we follow a same approach, but we solve the same subproblem multiple times. But in dynamic programming, we solve a same subproblem only once and stores a result in a table and retrieve whenever it is required. If we talk about this, dynamic programming is a problem-solving technique similar to divide and conquer approach. It solves the problem by dividing them into the subproblems. It solves the subproblem and stores the result in a table so that it can be retrieved whenever it is required. If we think about a takeaway from this slide, the basic difference, it was invented by Richard Bellman in 1950, right, for solving the optimization problem. And now if we talk about the difference between dynamic programming and divide and conquer solve problem by dividing them into the subproblems, but it solves the same subproblem multiple times. Dynamic programming, as an improvement to divide and conquer approach, solves the subproblem single time and stores the result in a table so that it can be retrieved from that table whenever it is required. This change helps us to improve the complexity of the complex algorithms. If we talk about the characteristics of dynamic programming, these are the 2 pointers which we have to look. When a problem has the following characteristic, then we can apply dynamic programming to this. First is optimal substructure, and second is overlapping subproblem. In optimal substructure, if an optimal solution contains an optimal subsolution, then the problem exhibits an optimal substructure property, right? If an optimal solution contains an optimal subsolution, basically, when we divide a problem into subproblems. Now, how we solve these subproblems to obtain the optimal subsolutions. When we get an optimal subsolution, that optimal subsolution will be helpful for providing a solution of a problem that will be optimal. Next is overlapping subproblem. If a recursive algorithm revisits the same subproblem repeatedly, that is, if a recursive algorithm revisits the same subproblem repeatedly, then it is called as a problem have an overlapping subproblem. Now, these are the 4 basic steps that must be taken into the consideration while solving any of the dynamic programming problem. First is to characterize the structure of an optimal solution. We will discuss all these steps while discussing about the 4 basic problems that will be discussed during the dynamic programming. First step, we have to characterize the structure of an optimal solution. Then we have to define the recursive solution for that optimal solution. Compute the value of an optimal solution in a bottom-up fashion. Whereas in divide and conquer, we are solving it as a top-down fashion. And construct an optimal solution from a computed information. Right. So these four basic steps must be taken into the consideration while solving any dynamic programming problem. That is, characterizing the structure of an optimal solution, then defining a recursive solution, then defining a recursive solution, then computing the value of an optimal solution typically in a bottom-up fashion, and then construct an optimal solution from a computed information. These are the four problems which we must taken into the consideration is matrix chain multiplication, that is longest common subsequence, 0-1 knapsack, and float Warshall algorithm. These four algorithms will be discussed in detail in a separate lecture one by one. Thank you.